Welcome. I guess I am going live a couple minutes early. I hit the button and here we are. Anyways, tonight I wanted to talk to you about Dante's Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno, Paradiso, actually, Dante's Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise. So, Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise. And to examine it as a blueprint for the initiatory journey. Now, one of the things that I like to do before I really get going on a live stream, and especially considering that I ended up going live a couple minutes before I had intended to, to give people a chance to show up here. What I like to do on a lot of my live streams is to do a bibliomancy or a tarot card reading, a very simple divination to set the stage and just as a little bit of extra guidance for people who happen to come across this video, whether they are watching it live, such as you are right now, if you're here with me tonight, or if you are watching this as an archive video later on. So tonight I'm going to be doing a bibliomancy using the I Ching, and I like to use the version of it put out by Benabel Wen. She has a YouTube channel as well, and I highly recommend you check it out. This actually is a very cool book. It's hardcover and it's got over 900 pages in it. So you don't want to fall asleep reading this and have it land on your face. but, and I speak from experience, but it does have a lot of background information on the I Ching as well as esoteric Taoism, which is very fascinating. But I'm going to do a quick bibliomancy and see what we get. And this is guidance for anybody who happens to be watching this, whether it's live or after the fact. If you've come across this video, this is for you. And I'm going to put on my glasses for this. Okay, what did we get here? Hexagram number 37, the family. Interesting. And this is what it looks like right there. And this hexagram is composed of the wind trigram above the fire trigram. So wind over fire. And the oracle for this one states, do not resist dependence on others, but be independent, but be so independent that others depend on you. When there is interdependence, then there will be great. I don't have a lot of light here. Uh, okay, sorry. Do not resist dependence on others, but be independent, but be so independent that others depend on you. Where there is interdependence, there will be great success. Nurture your familial bonds. First, loyalty to the clan. Leave no housekeeping unattended. With them, you are strengthened and supported. With you, they are anchored and united. Interesting. Does that resonate with anyone here? Leave a comment in the live chat or in the comments section below if that resonated with you. It's very interesting. It's something I'm going to have to ponder. Definitely is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, in particular. So it's interesting that that came up for me, especially. It definitely resonates with me, and I find that it pretty much always resonates. Not pretty much, it always resonates. Um, it's a very powerful oracle, the I Ching. Whether you're doing a full reading or whether you're just doing a quick bibliomancy, it always hits. It always lands, and I really appreciate the I Ching for that purpose or for that reason. Um, I'm also very into tarot, so that tarot is something that I've been studying for much longer than the I Ching, but I Ching is something that I've learned to appreciate more recently, and I'm glad that I found it. It's very cool. There's some really interesting stuff in there. A lot of wisdom in those words. So tonight, I wanted to talk to you all about Dante's Divine Comedy and the system of initiation that it represents, or the blueprint that it presents, you could say. And if you look at it, most people know about Dante's Inferno. It's the one that's most talked about. And that is just part one of a trilogy called the Divine Comedy. And in Inferno, as you probably know, Dante goes down, descends through the various levels or rings of hell. He eventually ends up in the pit of hell and encounters Satan, and then goes back up to the surface. Now, the next book is called Purgatory, and in that, he is on the surface of the earth and ends up climbing a mountain. And then from the top of that mountain, we we get to the end of that book, and the third and final installment of Dante's Divine Comedy involves him then ascending through the heavens, and those are associated for the most part with planets. So where does this idea come from? You have a lot of ancient wisdom, ancient mysteries that follow this same pattern, or at least parts of it. For example, one of the oldest examples is the descent of Ishtar into the underworld. So you have Ishtar showing up at the gates of the underworld and knocks on the door, knocks on the gate. The gatekeeper to the underworld, it says, what's going on? What do you want?" And Ishtar said, "Open up these doors, or I'm going to break it down, and I'm going to unleash a zombie apocalypse upon the world. I'm going to let all the dead out, and you don't want that. So just let me in. I want to see my sister." And her sister is Erishkigal, who is the queen of the underworld. And so the gatekeeper then goes to Erishkigal and says, "Your sister's here. She wants in, and she said that if we don't let her in, she's gonna break down the gate and unleash all the dead." And Erishkigal is annoyed, but ultimately says, "Okay, fine, let her in, but make sure she goes through the full process that anybody coming through these gates will have to go through. And so you have Ishtar going down through the 7 levels of the underworld. And at each point, she has to give up one of her garments. And these include like a jeweled girdle, her earrings, various different, her crown, all these different articles of clothing until she finally arrives at the courtyard of Kernugi, which is the which is where her sister rules the underworld from. And this is equivalent to Dante reaching the pit of hell and encountering Satan. And at that point, Ishtar is completely naked because she's been divested of all of her garments and jewelry and other items that she entered into the gates of hell with. From that point, she ends up there's some drama that happens, but ultimately she drinks the water of life and reascends back up through those 7 levels of the underworld back up to the surface. And that's one of the most ancient versions of that story that we have available to us, that has survived to the present day. And we have ancient cuneiform tablets that tell that story. Now, it's interesting because a version of this story has come forward into throughout history as the Dance of the Seven Veils, and it is essentially a striptease where a beautiful woman playing the role of Ishtar will gradually divest herself of a series of 7 veils. And each of those is representative of the descent into the underworld, just as Ishtar did in the myths. Um, so her doing the dance of the 7 veils was a reenactment, and in itself was a type of initiation for those um, witnessing the dance. And of course, you have the entertainment value of that sort of thing was probably on the minds of a lot of the people observing it, but encoded in that dance was a reenactment of an ancient myth, and a system of initiation was symbolically encoded into that. And we see Dante doing roughly the same sort of thing, where he begins his journey by descending into the various different levels of the underworld. And in his case, it was through a Christian lens. So he was, of course, that would be hell, right? So, and then in the Christian, especially the Catholic cosmology, you then have this realm of purgatory, which is um, the second installment of the Divine Comedy by Dante. And he places himself as the main character that's going through this journey. And this prepares one for the ascent into heaven, or the heavens, technically. And he goes through various different things, but it's interesting that he basically climbs a mountain in that. So he is technically still on the surface of the earth in the Purgatory book, but he has ascended to one of the highest points within that, and within that realm, within the earthbound realm, you could say. Also known in occult terms as the sublunary realm, which literally means below the moon. So anything below the lunar sphere, which was thought to be the lowest planetary sphere or the lowest heaven, was referred to as the sublunary realm. So the first two books take place within the sublunary realm. And in a lot of different traditions around the world, you have this idea that the top of the mountain was the place that you could get to that was closest to divinity or to the heavens, which logically, of course, makes sense because heaven was thought of as above. And so, if you can get to the highest point on the earth, which would naturally be the top of a mountain, then you would be closest to heaven. And you also have this idea in, well, it takes place in the Bible, for example, the Tower of Babel, where you have people who had decided that they were going to build a tower that would reach up into the heavens. And this is an attempt at ascension, an attempt at achieving apotheosis. And they were doing so in a collective way, but ultimately it was shut down in that story, in the biblical story, where the God of the Bible in that story um, separates the people. He makes them not be able to understand each other, and each of them are speaking different languages, so they couldn't communicate with each other, so that they couldn't cooperate and share knowledge and coordinate their efforts and actually achieve what they were attempting to achieve. Now, from a Gnostic perspective, and I consider myself a Gnostic Luciferian, from a Gnostic perspective, this is the demiurge trying to keep people ignorant and um, and divided, right? Because he doesn't want them to achieve ascension. He doesn't want them to reach their higher potential. But that same idea that building a tower or a structure that reaches very high up into the sky is a form of humans trying to achieve that ascension, that apotheosis, that divine state, to reach for their higher potentials. And a natural peak being a mountain is also climbing that mountain, scaling that mountain is also symbolic of that same journey, that same striving. And you also find in Greek mythology, for example, that the ruling gods, the Olympian gods, were residing at the top of Mount Olympus, on the top of a mountain. And you have the story of the Greek light bearer Prometheus climbing that mountain, stealing the fire from the forge of Hephaestus, one of the Olympian gods, the god of the forge, and taking that fire down the mountain and giving it to humans and teaching them how to utilize that fire. And this is knowledge that they weren't supposed to have, forbidden knowledge that the Olympian gods and Zeus in particular didn't want humans to have because he wanted to keep people ignorant. He wanted to keep the humans ignorant because they were much easier to control. And Prometheus became a cultural hero for doing that, for giving humans that knowledge of fire to empower them with this hidden or forbidden knowledge so that they could reach their higher potential. And of course, because it undermined the system of power and control that had been put into place by Zeus, Prometheus was punished for that. And we all know the type of punishment. He was bound to a rock or a boulder, or sometimes people say a mountain. Either way, he was earthbound in a sense, symbolically, literally earthbound, and an eagle would come and eat his liver. And there's symbolism in that if you wanted to look into it. The eagle was the bird that was especially associated with Zeus, and the liver as well, if you look into that, has a connection with Zeus or Jupiter, which is the Roman name for that same god. And I see Mike is here. Hey, Mike, I'm glad you made it. You're not too late. I guess I started about 20 minutes ago, but yeah, we're just getting started here. So I'm glad you managed to show up. And so you have this idea of the gods or divinity being at the top of a mountain. And you have this idea in um, Shinto religion, which is the indigenous religion of Japan, the indigenous form of shamanism that we find there, the form of um, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a word that means believing that all things have a spirit, animism. The Japanese, the indigenous form of animism that developed in Japan called Shintoism, they have um, these ideas about mountains themselves being entities, and you refer to Mount Fuji, for example, as Fuji-san, which is roughly equivalent to Mr. Fuji. You give them, it's an honorific, it's a title that you would give to a person, and it's an entity, it's a god. And climbing that mountain is to commune with divinity as well. And people do it constantly. There is a climbing season in particular, but there's a lot of people that climb Mount Fuji every year. Um, and it's not just Mount Fuji, there is a whole tradition around climbing mountains in Japan called Shugendo. And you have these monks who live in the mountains and they climb the mountains and they will subject themselves to uncomfortable situations. It's a form of asceticism where they will, for example, famously meditate under waterfalls. So you have a small waterfall coming down the mountain, and they will sit underneath the falling water. So the water is landing on them, and it's usually pretty cold. because it's from melting snow and ice from the peak of the mountain, usually. And this cold water is pouring over them, and they sit and they meditate. And it is a form of overcoming these challenges. And um, that is part of that spiritual path of Shugendo, which is that you find in Japan. But it's not just in Japan that you have these ideas. It's a very common idea that mountains are considered to be places where spirits reside, and climbing the mountain puts you closer in touch with divinity. And as I said earlier, it's a symbol of that striving for divinity and the striving for ascension. Michael says River Boyne is the same concept, named after the goddess Boann. Many Irish pagans go there for spiritual cleansing. Yeah, see, it's very common around the world in a lot of different cultures, um, not just Judeo-Christian, not just Japanese. Basically every culture has um, the same basic idea surrounding mountains. And in the second book of Dante's Divine Comedy, you have right. And now back to Dante's Trent mentions in the comment. Um, in the second book of Dante's Divine Comedy, he climbs a mountain, and that prepares him for the third and final installment of the Divine Comedy, which is Paradise, or Paradiso, because I mean it was written in Italian. Um, and you have this idea of then he starts to actually ascend into the heavens. And the first heaven is the planetary sphere of the moon. That is the first heaven. And this concept goes really far back as well. You have this idea of the cosmos as perceived from our vantage point here on Earth. And if you visualize Earth as the starting point and you look outward into the cosmos, into the heavens, you could say, you'll notice that there are a lot of stars, for one thing. And if you track them, they all generally move in the same direction. And you've probably seen these time lapse photos where they place a camera down and they'll point it at the North Star and leave the shutter open and then let it go for hours and hours in the night. And what it will track is that all of the stars revolve around that North Star. The North Star stays stationary because it's pointed at that star. And then all the other ones end up forming circles around because they all move together in perfect harmony together, except for certain wandering stars, certain wanderers. So, certain points of light, certain celestial objects wander in their own path that doesn't conform to that same path that the rest of the stars, what they call the fixed stars and the wanderers. Now, the word planet literally means wanderer, and that's where that comes from because the planets took their own route, and they even sometimes looked like they were going backwards compared to the backdrop of stars. And that's what we refer to as retrograde when a planet is in retrograde, and you've probably heard people say, "Oh, I can't get anything right because Mercury is in retrograde right now." Mercury is a planet that is supposed to rule intellectual activities and communications. It was the messenger of the gods, and therefore, if you were trying to communicate and you're having all these problems communicating or in intellectual pursuits, you could blame it on Mercury being in retrograde because it was going backwards from the perspective of being here on Earth looking out at the stars. And that's what retrograde means. So if you're wondering about that, that's the meaning of that. So these wanderers or planets, there were seven of them known to the ancients. Um, these were the ones that you could see with the naked eye without any instruments. So they included the moon and the sun in this as well. But what they ended up doing is after watching them and observing them and tracking the movements of these wanderers for very long periods of time. The Babylonians did this, the Mayans did this. Um, those are two of the cultures that really focused on that. They did this in ancient India, or what's now called India, and they noticed that they kind of calculated out which ones were closer to us and which ones were further out, and they figured out um, uh, what these levels were. That they figured that they were each in a level, and that you could kind of, it was like a ladder of lights. And there is in the Chaldean philosophy this idea of the Chaldean ladder of lights, which took from the Babylonian priests the knowledge that they had gathered through observation about this. And they calculated out which ones would be closer to the earth and which ones would be further away. And in that system, you have, you start on earth, and then the first heaven out is the moon. And this conforms exactly to the scheme that we see playing out in Dante's paradise. So the first heaven is the moon. The next heaven is Mercury. Then Venus, the sun. The next after that is Mars. Then Jupiter. And then the heaven after that is Saturn. And beyond that, you have the celestial sphere, they called it. Now, if you ever took a tour of a Masonic hall or a Masonic lodge or a Masonic temple, they call, those are all terms that are used interchangeably. You'll notice that they have these two pillars that are at the entrance of the temple. And on the top of one, you have the terrestrial sphere, which is the Earth, the globe that you'd normally find, like in a science class. But then on the other pillar, you have what's known as a celestial sphere. And the idea being that you have the Earth, in the globe of the Earth, but then around it you have another concentric sphere, which is where all the stars are on, and it moves it rotates as well, and that's one of the ancient explanations for how that works. Where this, so you have Earth, then you go through those planetary spheres that I just mentioned in order: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and then Saturn. And that forms a ladder of lights that brings you to the celestial sphere, where all the fixed stars are located. And then beyond that is what Dante referred to as the primum mobile, and that would be the ninth heaven in that sphere, or in that system, because you have the moon being the first, and then you go through to Saturn being the seventh, then the eighth sphere being the um, celestial sphere, the fixed stars, the zodiac, all the constellations of the zodiac, and then the beyond the celestial sphere, what would be the ninth heaven, is where Dante encounters God. In his system, in the Christian system, he refers to him as the primum mobile, which is the hub of the wheel, where scientifically, if you have a wheel that's turning, the the scientifically mathematical point at the center of that wheel does not move. It doesn't rotate. It's still. And that's what he says is there. So it's kind of like, once you get far enough through the concentric spheres, you end up at the center of the whole thing. And so it's almost like, it mirrors itself in a way, up and down, because you have him going to the pit of hell and meeting Satan, the king of hell, and it's at that lowest point, um, at the very pit of hell, and you have um, then you have him going up to the top of that system as well, where it's God at the top, which is the King of Heaven in Dante's version of that. And it's funny because in Dante's Paradise, he's completely unmoving. He is um, he doesn't do anything. He just sits there in contemplation. And I guess in some way that's supposed to explain this idea, or there's a philosophy that's referred to as, well, I can't remember the name of it, but the idea that you have God who set things in motion and then didn't intervene from that point forward. And so Dante apparently thinks that that makes the most sense, because that's how he wrote it. It was quite a while ago that I read that, so I can't remember how it actually, where he goes from there. But that is a very ancient system as well, where you have this idea of ascending those spheres, and you have this idea in ancient Judaism, and you have it it's referred to as the Merkava tradition, where the individual, the mystic, will build themselves a body of light, or the Merkava body, where they will be able to utilize that immortal body of light to ascend those spheres. And at each heaven, they were to give a certain password that would allow them to enter into that sphere and ascend to the next. And in their system of initiation, their version of the mysteries, they were given in their initiations those passwords that would allow them to pass through each of those spheres and ascend finally to divinity and become immortal on the spiritual planes. Now you have this same basic idea in Gnosticism, where each of the planetary spheres is ruled by one of the planetary archons. An archon is just a Greek word for ruler. And each of these rulers would attempt to block you. And if they were successful, then you would get sent back down and reincarnated. Very similar to the idea of samsara, that cycle of rebirth, of birth, death, and rebirth through reincarnation over and over as one gets trapped in the illusion of Maya. So the Gnostics had that same basic idea that if any of those archons along the way could trick you into getting caught up in the illusion, the, they would try and present a narrative to you, and if you got caught up in that narrative, it would ensnare you, and you would get dragged back down and trapped into a physical incarnation again, and you'd have to try again the next time to ascend. And in that system of not that form of Gnosticism, then you would try and achieve ascension through overcoming this series of archons that were related to the planetary spheres. Now, in modern times, we know that there are actually two additional planets beyond Saturn. You have Uranus and you have Neptune. And those were later discovered because you couldn't see them with the naked eye through observation. You had to have some sort of instrument that would allow you to see further out. And so in modern times, we could add those in. We could add those two planetary spheres into the system if we wanted, into that ladder of lights. Additionally, um, we have decided upon 12 main constellations that we consider to be part of the belt of the zodiac. Now, these are the planets, or sorry, the stars, the constellations of stars that the sun symbolically moves throughout one solar cycle, throughout 1 year. And the way that's measured, and it can be measured at any point really, but traditionally it's measured at the spring equinox. So on the morning of the spring equinox, one would check the On the horizon, actually, it would be more like it would be calculated, because on the horizon, on the morning of the spring equinox, when the sun rises, you can't see the stars because the sun is there. Um, it blocks out. There's so much light pollution, you could say, from the sun that you can't see the stars. And there is this interesting phenomenon where Venus, the planet Venus, is the last celestial object that you'll see just before the sun rises, and that is referred to as the morning star, which is synonymous with Lucifer. The word Lucifer was the Latin word that the ancient Romans used to describe that. Anyways, um, on the spring equinox, on the morning of the spring equinox, when the sun rose on the horizon, they would calculate, well, what constellation would be there as a backdrop if we could see it, right? And then so that is the constellation that the sun was in on the spring equinox. It's almost like saying the Earth's sun sign in the moment, you could say, for that year, potentially. And over time, over a very long period of time, you have a precession of the equinox, and it changes. And that determines what zodiacal age you are in. But if you check it throughout the year, on each morning throughout the year, every single morning out of 365 days, if you check or calculate out what constellation the sun rose against the backdrop of on the horizon that morning, then throughout the course of those 365 days, it will have passed through all of the 12 zodiac signs or constellations. And there were actually originally 13 constellations that were identified that the sun would move through. But we get this passed down mainly from the Babylonian priests, and they had special numbers. They had a what's referred to as a sexagesimal numbering system is what they used. We today in modern times we typically use a decimal system where you have 10 unique characters, hence dece, um, which is a prefix that means 10. So you have 10 unique characters to represent numbers, and then you just kind of move to the next column and then repeat those same, and then so on and so forth. And that's how our numbering system works. In ancient Babylon, they had a base 60 instead of a base 10. They had a base 60 numbering system called sexagesimal. And really, they didn't actually have um, 60 unique characters for each of those 60 values. What they had was 10 unique characters, actually, but they would group them in such a way that they could represent 60 unique values. So they grouped them in such a way. And you can look this up. So it was more like a hybrid between decimal and sexagesimal. Anyways, within their numbering system, their preferred numbering system, you had certain numbers that would come up that became significant to them. Just like how we have people say 11. 11 ends up becoming a special number in our system. And that wouldn't exist in a different numbering system. So if you had, I mean, I guess it would, but it would be a different value. So I'm getting into the weeds here. I'm getting off onto a tangent, but I personally find numbering systems interesting. But what we do find here is that the ancient Babylonian priests, when they studied the belt of the zodiac, the constellations that they had identified, and which ones the sun would rise on the horizon against the backdrop of, that was referred to as the belt of the zodiac. And originally they were like, well, there's 13 of them. And most of them are roughly equal. Generally, they're fairly close to the same amount of time that the sun spends in each of them, except for Scorpio and the 13th one that you may or may not have heard of, called Ophiuchus. And Ophiuchus literally means serpent bearer. And you'll have this character that's basically holding a serpent. And those were shorter than the other ones by a fair bit. And so you had the Babylonians who thought that the number 12 was special to them in their numbering system, the way that they calculated out numbers. And they figured that, well, actually, if you take which numbers were special, 12 is one of them, 60 is another one, and that's why you have 12 hours on a clock, and you have 60 um, minutes in an hour, and you have actually 360 degrees in a circle. 360 was another number that was special to them. So, what they ended up realizing is they said, well, you know what? If we combined Scorpio and Ophiuchus, then it would be a lot more elegant and it would match our special numbers a lot better. And we could fudge the numbers just a little bit, and then we could create this idealized version of it where there are 12 equal signs of the zodiac. And that's what they did. And that is what has been passed down to us today. But it's not how it actually is in the observable sky. It's an idealized version of that to make it fit with the magical and special numbers of the ancient Babylonian priests. So I recognize a 13th sign of the zodiac, or a 13th constellation of the zodiac, which is Ophiuchus as well. And I feel that in our modern era, which since 2012, or since the winter solstice of 2012, I refer to as the new Luciferian era. And currently we are in year 13 of the new Luciferian era, because we start counting at zero, just like a baby. You know, when a baby's born, you don't say they're one. They're not one until they've lived for a full year. And then on their first anniversary of their birthday, then you say they've turned 1 year old, right? Same with the new Luciferian era. Year zero began on December 21st of 2012. And currently we are in year 13 of the new Luciferian era. Anyways, in the new Luciferian era, I personally feel that it is valid to recognize the two outer planets of Uranus and Neptune as part of the ladder of lights, and to recognize Ophiuchus as its own unique constellation of the zodiac, rather than combining it with Scorpio out of some ancient idea of symmetry and making things fit into their preconceived ideas of perfection and such, rather than actually observing the natural world as it is in all its um, nuance. So, in the new Luciferian era, I recognize those additional planets as well as the 13th zodiac sign, Ophiuchus. And what I've done is I have founded an esoteric order, a Gnostic Luciferian esoteric order referred to as the Novus Ordo Luciferi. You may have heard of it. Some of you watching this are probably members of it. But what I've done is on the first day of year 11 of the new Luciferian era, I officially ritualistically announced the formation of the Novus Ordo Luciferi, which means the new order of light bearers. And we, as members, are the light bearers, those who bring the light of knowledge and awareness, that we seek out that hidden and forbidden knowledge and we aim to make it available to those who are seeking it for their empowerment so that they may facilitate their increasing of their awareness, to their facilitating of their ascension to godhood, their journey of apotheosis. And so each of us as members become light bearers, become Lucifers. And that's what the word Lucifer literally means, is light bearer or bringer of light. Remember how earlier I mentioned that the ancient Roman people referred to Venus as the morning star as Lucifer? The reason that they did that was because it symbolically called forth the light of day. It was like a rooster calling forth the light of day symbolically. To call forth the light is to be a force of enlightenment. And that's why they called it Lucifer, because it symbolically brought the light. And in on the winter solstice of year 11 of the new Luciferian era, so just over 2 years ago at the point that I'm recording this tonight, I founded the Novus Ordo Luciferi, and we are establishing a system of initiation through that, an initiatory path that takes inspiration from that universal journey of initiation that Dante also tapped into through from ancient sources, from all the way back to Sumerian, which is the oldest recorded religion and spiritual system that we are aware of that has survived to the present day. And we have this idea where we are here on the earth, and this is our starting point. So we explore the elements of our world, of the terrestrial sphere, the earthly realm. And then we take our descent into the underworld. And then we reascend back to the surface. And then we prepare ourselves for an ascension through the heavens or the planetary spheres, and then we go through we climb that ladder of lights, and then finally we reach the celestial sphere, of which is particularly represented by the zodiac. Those are the more iconic fixed stars or collection of fixed stars. And in the version that we have within the Novus Ordo Luciferi, um, first we do the three principal elements of water, fire, air. Then we do the seven levels of the underworld as we reenact the descent of Ishtar and reascent to the surface. We then explore the realm of the surface of the earth to prepare for an ascension and declare our intention to build a tower that spans the heavens, that ladder of lights, a ziggurat, if you will, an ancient Sumerian or Babylonian tower, leveled tower like a stepped pyramid. And each of those is a planetary sphere that we climb like the ladder of lights. And then from there, we we explore that belt of the zodiac, the 13 constellations of the zodiac, the 13 stations of the zodiac. And if you are interested in learning more about the system of initiation represented within the ranks of the Novus Ordo Luciferi, there is a link in the description of this video, novusordoluciferi.org, and you can participate as well. And we actually have a full learning platform that has currently we have 13 courses available, and that's growing. There are over 40 hours worth of video lessons embedded within the modules of those courses. And there are documents, internal documents for the internal teachings of the order, as well as a set of practices that are for members of the Novus Ordo Luciferi that you get access to when you decide to join and participate in the NOL, the Novus Ordo Luciferi. And we also have weekly meetings every Thursday. So tomorrow evening, there is a 2 hour meeting that takes place in our private Discord server that is for members only. And we have members around the world. And we are also establishing local branches around the world where people can meet in person and participate in meetings in person, where there are prepared lectures as well as group rituals and other esoteric practices. Now, within the Novus Ordo Luciferi, it is a formal school of thought. It is a branch of Luciferianism, actually, a school of Luciferianism that teaches Gnostic Luciferian alchemy as a system of occultism that is what I've developed after over 30 years of practice. And somebody mentioned California. We do have members in California that have expressed interest in forming a branch. So there isn't one now, but there is one currently being established in California. So if you are interested in that, um, there's one being formed in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. There is one in Houston, Texas, and there are people that are in there are members that are in multiple European countries that are interested in establishing branches there. So we're at the phase now where we are starting to do the work of establishing these local branches. So if you're interested in that, you could be in the ground floor and help get some of these local branches off the ground. And we refer to them as obelisks. The smallest form of a Novus Ordo Luciferi local branch is an obelisk, and a larger version of it, you can evolve it into what is referred to as a tower. And then if you start working the planetary magic, then you are building a ziggurat. And so you can establish a local ziggurat if you get into the planetary work as well. And then doing the work of the zodiac is you can establish a spire. So all of these are terms that are related to towers, different types of towers, or vertical structures. And if you want to understand a little bit more about the nature of these three main um, sections of the order, so you have the sublunary realm, which is the primary work of the Novus Ordo Luciferi. When you first join, you work the elements, and then when you're ready, you do the work where you descend into the underworld and reascend, and then prepare for ascent into the planetary work. The next level is the ziggurat, where you're building the ziggurat by doing these planetary magic. And um, so the first section is kind of kind of pagan in a way, where it's sort of it's alchemy, it's natural magic, and it's working with the elements, in particular the elements of the earth. And then you get into the planetary work, um, the planetary magic work, and that is formatted more like a chivalric order or a Masonic order, that style of lodge working. Although through tarot magic, which we also teach in the order, there are ways of doing these rituals solo by yourself, through the form of tarot magic that I've developed. And that is for people who are isolated and they can't attend group ritual. So there are options for people who can't travel or aren't near a branch. So then finally, the third section where we work with the zodiac, that operates more like a Gnostic temple or a Gnostic church, you could say, a Gnostic Luciferian temple, that form of working. And so you get the three main pillars of Western occultism, I would say. Although there is some influence from Eastern traditions as well, we don't limit ourselves to learn to knowledge that is just from the Western esoteric tradition. Um, we take inspiration from wherever we find it, and the first order, or the main chunk where we're working with the elements that would be alchemical, you could say, or even you could even potentially call it pagan. Then the next order is Masonic and chivalric, almost, you could say, or lodge style workings. And then the final pillar of occultism would be the Gnostic temple degrees. Ultimately, you actually have a total of 33 degrees, which it just works out that way. So you have um, one of them, you work 7 degrees in one ritual, and that's the descent because you go 7 levels down through the underworld, and each one is a degree, but you get them all in one ritual. So there are 27 distinct rituals or degrees, but um, one of them has 7 in one. So it works out to 33 in total. And if you want to learn more about that, and if you want to get involved in the work of the Novus Ordo Luciferi, I highly encourage you to check out the website at novusordoluciferi.org, which is in the description of this video. And also, if you aren't sure, I highly encourage you to check out the Luciferian Research Society. That isn't specifically the Novus Ordo Luciferi, but it is a meeting place or a crossroads for people who are exploring Luciferianism and are from various different branches of Luciferianism. Somebody actually mentioned in the chat the the temple of or sorry, the Order of Phosphorus, TOPH. That is one of the schools of um, Luciferian occultism that is out there. I'm an honorary member, but I'm not an active member. Um, I have a lot of friends that are in it, and I have um, Michael Ford, the founder of that order, has given me the internal documents for a lot of the degrees of the order, and I've done a lot of help with helping organize certain aspects of TOPH. But that's one of the orders that is discussed within the Luciferian Research Society, alongside the Novus Ordo Luciferi, alongside the Temple of Ascending Flame, alongside solo practitioners, and adjacent paths and other branches of the left hand path of Luciferianism, um, and related or adjacent paths that people discuss within the Luciferian Research Society. The Luciferian Research Society is a place for people to come together and cross pollinate ideas so that we can achieve a greater level of unity and cohesion and cooperation amongst the different branches of Luciferianism so that we can become stronger and empower one another. Whether we are practicing adversarial Luciferianism, whether we're practicing Gnostic Luciferianism, whether we're practicing draconic or draconian Luciferianism, or any other variant that you might find within Luciferianism, we can all come together, share knowledge, discuss ideas, collaborate on projects, and form a greater, uh, unity and cooperation on the Luciferian within the Luciferian community through the Luciferian Research Society. Now, if you wanted to participate in that, I encourage you to go to luciferianresearch.org, and there is a link that will that you can click and you can join the Discord server, which is the primary platform that the Luciferian Research Society currently exists on. We have over 600 members of the Luciferian Research Society at present and growing. Last I saw, I think it was like 610 or something. Maybe by the time that you've come across this video and join, maybe you'll be the 666th member. If you are, we'll tell you for sure. Um, that would be pretty neat if you happen to join and were that 666th member, wouldn't it? Either way, there are over 600 members of the Luciferian Research Society, and it is an open community. It isn't for discussing internal um, inner work of any particular order, but it is a place where we can discuss the more public aspects of our work, and we can share knowledge with one another, collaborate on projects such as, for example, like the Flambeau Noir International Left Hand Path Conference that I have occasionally produced, brings people together from different branches of the left hand path to come together and share their knowledge with one another and um, foster a greater level of community and cooperation amongst our community. Because let's be honest, it's a very niche subject. It's maybe, one in a million out there in the world are interested in the left hand path, in Luciferianism and adjacent paths like that. So it behooves us to come together and focus on what we share in common and not let the differences that we have amongst each other to separate us. Don't let what happened to the people who are building the Tower of Babel, don't let that happen to us. Let's come together. Let's support one another where our interests overlap, and we can become stronger and empower one another in the process. So, I encourage you to join the Luciferian Research Society. Go to luciferianresearch.org and you can participate in that community with us, meet a bunch of really cool people, have some really amazing discussions that are happening 24 hours a day. I'm there every day, hanging out, chatting, communicating with people. There's a ton of other people. Also, if you find yourself drawn to Gnostic Luciferian alchemy in particular, and the types of things that I talk about on this channel, especially, then I highly encourage you to take that next step and to join the school of thought, the esoteric order known as the Novus Ordo Luciferi. And that does take a bit of commitment to participate in, but I think that it's well worth the investment in time, effort, and the membership dues are very reasonable at only $5 American per month, and you'll get to be part of a global community of dedicated occultists who are practicing Gnostic Luciferian alchemy and sharing knowledge and supporting each other. We can troubleshoot if you're having problems learning how to lucid dream, for example, or if you are having difficulties understanding the tarot, um, energy work, alchemical theory and practice. These are things that we that we work on and practice. And if you want to learn that system, then I highly encourage you to join the Novus Ordo Luciferi. And there's nothing stopping you from being part of more than one of these schools of thought. Um, you can join the Novus Ordo Luciferi and the Order of Phosphorus and learn both adversarial Luciferianism, occult system, as well as the Luciferian, the Gnostic Luciferian alchemy system taught within the Novus Ordo Luciferi. You can learn them both. Why not, right? If you have the bandwidth, maybe you want to do one at a time. Maybe you want to explore just one that you're really especially interested in. But yeah, there's nothing stopping you from participating in more than one if that is your desire, and if you have the bandwidth, the energy, or the resources to do both, or also join the Temple of Ascending Flame if you want. These are things that you can do to further your studies in Luciferian occultism, and I highly encourage you to do so if you feel the calling to take that next step, to take that next level, and learn a school of occultism. And if you have any questions, hit me up on the Luciferian Research Society. It's completely free to join, and you're going to find a lot of really cool people there. We've managed to foster a really respectful environment for learning and exploring ideas and sharing with each other. So hopefully I'll see you around there. Come back to my channel here where I do live streams fairly often. I have every day I'm posting short videos as well. And if you want to catch the live streams, I always make a public free post on the Patreon associated with the Novus Ordo Luciferi. So you can go to the Novus Ordo Luciferi Patreon account and become a free follower of that account, and you will get emails notifying you when a live stream is going to happen on the channel. Like earlier tonight, before I went live, I posted on the Patreon that I was going to be going live with a link. So you can subscribe to this channel, and I encourage you to do so and hit that notification bell. But that doesn't always work. You don't always get that notification of a live stream. But if you go to the Patreon account associated with the Novus Ordo Luciferi, and you can find it on the novusordoluciferi.org website, there's a link directly to it from there. You can become a free follower of the Patreon and you'll get those notifications, as well as any public documents that we release. There was a downloadable PDF document called Longevity Foundations that you can join and download for free from the Patreon as well if you are interested in that. And that is a set of practices that you can integrate into your life that synergize with the alchemical practices in order to encourage and do what you can to achieve a long, healthy life. So that there's an ebook, a free ebook you can download from the Patreon, the Novus Ordo Luciferi Patreon, and any other free documents you can get just by being a free follower of the account. But if you want to take it to the next step, participate in the Novus Ordo Luciferi community and become a dedicated student of that Gnostic Luciferian alchemy and learn that system of occultism, then I highly encourage you to actually join the order and and learn that if you feel called to it. So let me know. Hit me up if you have any questions. Leave a comment here if you have any questions, or join the Discord server for the Luciferian Research Society. And until next time, everyone, stay lucid.